listens to classical music? Let's watch some football.
Alright team, making Wagner last time was a huge mistake. God did not like all that horrendous singing.
I agree. We better come up with something good this time so that the man doesn't cut our budget or send us to heck for real.
Yeah, we gotta keep in mind that Mr. Capital G is an old butt dude. We can't make someone as radical as Wagner again. So, what did y'all come up with for our next G's composer? Julia?
Okay, so our last composer, Wagner, definitely had good intentions with putting God and nationalism in his music, so I was thinking that we keep most of our harmonic developments from when we made Wagner. Those new harmonies made the pieces sound really big and fill more space, even when the instrument count stayed the same. We could also keep the trend of adding more instruments or adding new instruments to the orchestra and continue to feature more brass parts. Since the Crimean War, Austria is really just needing some nationalistic and pure music to complement their withdrawal from foreign affairs in Europe, so I think our new composer should be really religious so that we can get him to write that way in the name of God. It's not like that prideful nationalist characteristic could ever be used to support a certain German fascist leader
Never.
who contributed to the start of a Second World War.
Haven't heard of him.
Anyways, I don't think God likes operatic singing. I think we should focus more on the music itself. Wagner really liked that idea of Gesamtkunstwerk, which means total art in German, and it talks about combining art forms, which Wagner really liked, but I think we should get our new composer to disengage from that idea and write only music.
Don't you think it's a bit risky to associate our new composer with Wagner? Music critics seem to be a bit conflicted between Wagner and Brahms right now, so adding our new composer to the controversy might not be a good idea, especially since Edward Hanslick is so influential and he isn't such a big fan of Wagner.
I think we should still try to push the boundaries of common practice, like more harmonic tonal music, but this time a little more subtly, with more class, if you will. Here we can reuse some ideas from Wagner's opera Tristan und Isolde. In Wagner's Tristan und Isolde, the first chord that opens the opera is really specific because it doesn't follow into a specific key and therefore it doesn't follow the rules of common music. It can be enharmonically respelled as a half diminished seventh chord, and the chord sounds dissonant. So that's known as the Tristan chord, and it came to be known as a defining part of Romantic music. Wagner shifted away from normal harmonies where the chords follow a specific pattern of tension and release, and he instead started to embrace non-functional harmony, where chords were used for their tone color and unique sound without focusing on their function. In this example, I've quoted this Tristan chord into the structural bass line of a new work for our composer, and this is a fusion of the old and the new. It allows for a dissonant sound in the bass that bleeds into the tension in the foreground, and I think this is a fantastic new sound. Although it might not be popular with critics at first, we'll probably have to give it time to grow on people.
Ooh, beans. Anything else?
Oh, of course. We gotta make this new guy sound original too. So to add a little bit of pepper to the salt, I was thinking of changing orchestration style from last time. Instead of blending sound throughout instruments, let's make this new guy sound like he's using completely new instruments every other section.
Dude, are you good? Did you breathe in paint fumes or something? How about we listen to what the others say first, and then I'll come back to you.
Okay, here we go with my sketch of this new orchestration technique. We're gonna make the orchestration sound like it was inspired by the sounds of an organ. When an organist changes stops, he's really directing the air to different pipes in the organ, thereby creating a new sound. We can do something like this. The first section with flutes and string accompaniment holds tension in the melodic line by landing on the second scale degree before rushing into the resolution in the second section with reeds and horns. This creates an unexpected change of instrumentation. Isn't this such a great sound? It's so avant-garde, such a leap towards something different.
Honey, you need to sleep.
But
look, team, we need to make someone that God will actually enjoy. Let's hear from someone else. Eric?
Okay, so for symphonic works, we can use this formula. The first movement in sonata form, pretty fast. Then the second movement, slow down. The third movement, minor mode, it's like a scherzo. And then finally, the bombastic, awesome fourth movement with extended coda.
Wait a second now. Isn't that basically just symphonic form from the time of Beethoven? Did you even try making something original for this new guy?
I'm tired. Might change something, we already figured it out before.
He should be pretty mature when he starts writing, so it would make sense if the symphonic form sounds more like symphonies from the older eras. Those old classical sounds that sound more like Beethoven's writing are going out of style though, so he'll probably be one of the last ones to write music with that structure. The romantic era is in. Like I said, not a huge fan of mixing different art forms, and he's writing in an older symphonic style, so we can really omit the storytelling trend in the romantic era, but having really big dynamic contrast and deep emotions, those trends could suit him really well.
At least someone is not trying to lose their job. Eric, I need to see you in my office after this.
Darn.
Okay, I guess we can Frankenstein some fancy new harmonies with some old symphonic style. Kwanzi, please tell me you have something new to bring to the table. Oh, sweet baby Jesus. We are never gonna get funding for this new composer.
Well, if we had Wagner last time, I think we should call this one Brockner. Cheers to that, for real.
Hey.
Are we really gonna call him Brockner?
Hello, my name is Nkwanzi Benage, and today we will be diving into the complex, intricate life, especially the upbringing of Anton Bruckner. Now, Anton Bruckner was born in Ansfelden on September 4th, 1824, and he did unfortunately pass in Vienna, Vienna, Austria, on the 11th of October, 1896.
Hi, I'm Bruckner.
Now, Bruckner was born to an organist mother, and he grew up surrounded in a home with a lot of organ playing and music as a result, of course. And this might have directly or indirectly bred his profound love for music that would, of course, develop later on in his life.
What?
Now, at age 4, Bruckner began studying the violin, and though he did switch to the organ later on to follow in his mother's footsteps. By age 10, one could say that he had mastered the instrument, the organ playing, yes. Now, Bruckner's family did have some financial struggles as he was growing up, so he did often support his family by playing his fiddle at town dances. Now, Bruckner also grew up in a heavily religious household. Bruckner became increasingly creative throughout the early stages of his life and attributed all of it really to his profound religious faith and spiritual guidance. Now, in periods of prayer or fasting especially, Bruckner's inspiration intensified and absolutely did carry through into his pieces. Now, by 1835, Bruckner began studying in Horsching under his godfather J.B. Weiss, who was a composer. but following his father's unfortunate passing in 1837, Bruckner transitioned to a monastery school called the St. Florian, which would later play an integral role in his music development and especially his progress as a composer. Now, Bruckner continued his organ studies at the St. Florian and became a chorist, actually. Yes. La 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 la. La 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 la. Bruckner took time in 1840 to train as an assistant school teacher in Linz afterwards.
I will now begin training as an assistant school teacher in Linz.
Now, in 1845, Bruckner returned to the monastery as a teacher and as an organist this time, the same way his father had been once. Now, while teaching, Bruckner further developed his compositional skills, and on the side, while still at the St. Florian, Bruckner composed Requiem in D minor. Now, as time went on at the St. Florian, Bruckner became increasingly dissatisfied with his job. The choral prospects at the school just were not cutting it, to put it lightly. Now, although he had contemplated quitting before, Bruckner was reluctant to pursue a strictly musical career.
I don't want to commit to becoming a musician because what if I don't get a job? I need a job.
His friends, on the other hand, encouraged him to apply for a cathedral organist position, which he received with ease, of course. Now, Bruckner was a traditional man, and through this process never lost his rural accent and dress. Now, in 1861, Bruckner concluded his rigorous studies with a magnificent organ performance, and the judges were, in fact,
More learning for me.
Later in that same year, Bruckner teamed up with Otto Kitzler to commence a study period focusing on musical form and orchestration. Now, in 1864, Bruckner composed the first of 3 choral orchestral masses, the Mass in D minor, a piece truly reflective of this slow learning period and self-imposed training moment. The developmental history and upbringing of Anton Bruckner was really crucial in the molding and establishment of the composer he was to become.
Hey, do you know what era Bruckner wrote symphonies in? The Romantic era? Oh, thank you.
Bruckner's numerous musical experiences from his young age of playing the violin, spinet, and the organ, as well as being a choir boy at his school, has led to him pursuing a musical-filled career. As Bruckner continued in his musical education, devoted to developing his musical and compositional skills, during the period when he taught at St. Florian from 1845 to 1856, he composed various works in which the Viennese classical idiom in these pieces were influenced by Franz Schubert and Felix Mendelssohn. Bruckner was later introduced to Otto Kitzler, who led the Linz Theater Orchestra in Austria and was known to be Bruckner's orchestration teacher from 1861 to 1863. Kitzler later introduced Bruckner to the works of Franz Liszt, Hector Berlioz, and Richard Wagner. Bruckner was most inspired by the works of Richard Wagner, especially after listening to Kitzler's production of Wagner's opera Tannhäuser, which made the biggest impression on Bruckner. It was Wagner's influence which set Bruckner on the path to become a composer of symphonies.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you back to another episode of Tafelmusik, where we discuss the ins and outs of great classical works. In today's episode, I'd like to focus on a choral piece by the Austrian composer Anton Bruckner. This composition is well known, and I believe gives you the best picture of his musical output. This piece is the Te Deum. Too often when we think of Bruckner, the first thing that comes to mind is his symphonic works. He was a devoutly religious man, and he wrote many sacred works along with the symphonic works that are just as Brucknerian as the symphonies. The grandest and longest of these is definitely the Te Deum, which is a setting of a Latin hymn. The last bit of the text from the Te Deum is from the Book of Psalms, and Bruckner did not stray away from tradition here. Many other composers before him have also set the Te Deum, and musicologists just love to find the textual, interpretive differences between all of them. Bruckner decided to split the text into 5 parts, with the grand pause separating all of them. These 5 sections contrast each other in key, as well as orchestral and choral texture. For example, the choir sings in a mostly homophonic texture in the first section, which is very strong, and reflects the text, "We praise thee, O God." When Bruckner decides to set his second section, which only the singer, a tenor soloist, starts singing, the texture becomes more subtle because he is asking God to save his loyal followers. These details in composition make the entire work flow and move toward the goal, without dragging or repeating ideas. It makes the work so much more interesting. In total, an average performance of the Te Deum lasts around 24 minutes, but using Bruckner's organization of form, it feels just like a few minutes have passed, since you're always so engaged. Let's listen to an excerpt of this shift in texture. Now, I feel that the use of low brass should also be discussed in this piece. Bruckner used brass to double the voice parts and as a separate wind instrument. The former is a very traditional composition technique. Composers such as Bach and Mozart have used the trombone in this way to add more oomph, if you will, to the vocal parts when it is needed. Bruckner obviously wanted to follow in their footsteps, for the inclusion of the alto trombone is very out of place in a mid-romantic work. In addition, the religious subject matter of the Te Deum also screams doubling trombones, doubling voices, as Bach did in some of his cantatas, or Mozart did in his Requiem. Looking at the orange highlighted parts, the lower trombone voices are blended into the texture, playing with the rest of the brass play. This is the standard of the era that Bruckner wrote in, and what most of his brass parts look like in his symphonies. Let's take a close listen to the first couple of bars of the third movement, and see if you can hear the individual parts. In Bruckner's lifetime, this work, the Te Deum, and not his symphonies, were the most successful. It premiered over 30 times during the course of his life, and he was even paid for it, the only work that he was ever paid for. I believe that if this was the most successful work during his entire life, where he saw little fame, then it must have been really good to pop itself up above the rest of the music of that time. Oh, I think our time is up. Thank you once again for joining me today. Talful Music survives on the support of patrons such as yourself who watch our program on television. If you feel so very inclined to donate and support our work, please don't hesitate to call the number on your screen. I hope to see you again next week for an exciting review of Philip Glass's new work, an arpeggiated chord repeated for half an hour. I hope to see y'all then.
Welcome back to another super in-depth analysis of a composer who contributed something to an instrument. It's Low Brass Week, so today we are narrowing in on the trombone. Yeah, so exciting, so exciting. And at your many requests, we are doing Anton Bruckner because I just know that you all wanted this. This is you. So the first piece I will be talking about is called the Tu-Ai Kwali for 3 trombones. It's a very hard name to say. I just like to say that. It took me a very long time to learn how to say it. So yeah, it was composed in 1847. So it's very, 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 very old. And it was actually composed for Bruckner's aunt's funeral, which is kind of sad. But at the same time, I think that's what makes it like rich. Like that's what makes the sadness makes it rich, you know? In the WAB classification, the first one is number 114 and the second one is number 149. A little fun fact about the second one is that the bass trombone part was not in the WAB classification at the first, but don't worry, it was added later. You're good, you're good. So here's a little snippet. Alright, so this next one is the finale of the last full symphony Bruckner wrote. Symphony number 8, that is right, the 8th symphony. This symphony is sometimes called Apocalyptic, not by Bruckner though, some other people named it that. There are 2 versions of this symphony, one from 1887, which is much later than the Ai Kwali, and the second in 1890. This portion of the symphony has some military style music. It's a death march, so it sounds quite majestical, and there's a lot of brass, especially low brass, transfiguration. So here's a little snippet of that one.
Any more questions?
As a trombonist, what can I expect from Bruckner's use of the trombone in his compositions?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Writing for the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, Bruckner's use of the trombone in most of his symphonies were geared towards valve trombones due to the fact that the orchestra used only valve trombones up until the adoption of slide trombones in 1883. Because of the lighter tone of the valve trombone compared to the heavier and more dominant tone of the slide trombone, Bruckner placed the 2 trombones in different roles in his compositions. For the valve trombones, Bruckner was able to leverage the softer tones and more limited range of the valve trombone by tempering their dynamics to avoid producing a sheer brass tone and rather to achieve a more delicate soft tone. His use of valve trombones were often to provide thematic support for other sections, with the bass trombone providing extra weight alongside the tubas, as well as supporting the tenor trombones in unison. After the adoption of the slide trombone, it is notable that his compositional style for the trombone in his last 2 symphonies changed to having less thematic development and more towards a chordal support role. Alright, that's it for tonight's Q&A. Thank you for all your questions, and I hope to see you next week for some more Bruckner content.
Welcome to the Home Improvement channel. Today we'll be discussing Bruckner's influence on the music landscape of history. One of the ways that Bruckner sort of influenced the musical landscape is he used really big emotional highs and lows in his music, so lots of contrast and sort of a dramatic sound, and he was really well known for influencing Mahler to write that way. I think this shows that both kind of use the low brass as this like descending into sort of darker emotion type of sound, and I think that's similar in both. There's an interesting interview with Gerard Markson, who's the principal conductor of the National Symphony Orchestra in Ireland, who talks about how he can identify similarities in Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet ballet with a specific section of Bruckner's Ninth Symphony. I think these are similar in that they both use like a high-pitched, really light lead up to a very dark sort of brass sound, and so I think Bruckner might have influenced Prokofiev in that way. I think overall Bruckner's impact was allowing low brass to add intensity to a piece and to add a darker sound to Bruckner's music. One thing that's interesting about Bruckner's music is that there's actually different versions of it. That first version was the chalk version, and the second version was the critical edition, which people think better reflects Bruckner's original intentions. That second one actually has 11 fewer brass instruments playing in it, and I think that definitely has an impact on the sound, because to me it sounds like the first one has a low brass melody that sounds a lot more forward and obvious, and I think that adds to the intensity of the melody in the low brass section. And I think that that difference between them shows that Bruckner's music could have had a different impact depending on what edition was popular at the time.
Man, cable really sucks now. Honey? Honey? Can you get Netflix?